Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit Law, posted by user The Mirror US. This was posted at least 1 day ago, and it is a linked post. The title of the linked post reads, Judge strikes down Georgia 6-week ban on abortions after death of Amber Thurman. The link leads to an article located on themirror.com. As of recording, this post has over 5,000 upvotes and 115 comments. Now I know what you must be thinking. What could cause Georgia to repeal its abortion ban? Well, let's take a look at the Mirror's article. At the top of the article, we see the face of the young woman in question who died. And in the background, we see what appears to be a young son. Underneath the caption, we read, Thurman died in a suburban Atlanta hospital after experiencing a rare complication from taking an abortion pill. R.I.P. Thurman. May you rest in peace. The title of the article reads, Judge strikes down Georgia's 6-week ban on abortions after death of Amber Thurman. Underneath the title reads a subtitle. The ruling comes weeks after ProPublica published the tragic story of 28-year-old mother Amber Thurman, who died just weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 and ended a national right to abortion. This was written by Gina Martinez on September 30th of this year at 5:54 p.m. Eastern Time. This article does have a listen section, and this article, as well as the subreddit post, will be linked in the description notes of this episode. I begin reading the article. A Georgia judge has struck down the state's 6-week abortion ban just weeks after ProPublica published the tragic story of the preventable death of Amber Nicole Thurman. Linked here. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney wrote in his order Monday that, quote, liberty in Georgia includes in its meaning, in its protections, and in its bundle of rights, the power of a woman to control her own body, to decide what happens to it, and in it, and to reject state interference with her health care choices, unquote. Passing over a picture of Kamala Harris. Continue reading. McBurney wrote that his ruling means the law in the state returns to what it was before the law was passed in 2019, linked here, allowing abortions until roughly 20 weeks into a pregnancy. Quote, when a fetus growing inside a woman reaches viability, when society can assume care and responsibility for that separate life, then, and only then, may society intervene, unquote, McBurney wrote. We pass by another picture of Thurman. The image source here is Facebook. Thurman waited for 20 hours for treatment before eventually dying in the hospital from her infection. I continue reading. An quote, arbitrary 6-week ban, unquote, on abortions, quote, is inconsistent with these rights and the proper balance that a viability rule establishes between a woman's rights of liberty and privacy and society's interest in protecting and caring for unborn infants, unquote, the order says. The ruling comes weeks after ProPublica published the tragic story of 28-year-old mother Amber Thurman, who died just weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 and ended a national right to abortion. Thurman died in a suburban Atlanta hospital after experiencing a rare complication from taking an abortion pill. The young mother waited for 20 hours for treatment before eventually dying in the hospital from her infection. 2 weeks prior to Thurman's death, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, I believe that's meant to be spelled Brian Kemp, signed one of the country's most restrictive abortion laws, making performing the procedure a felony punishable by up to a decade in prison. Doctors in Thurman's case, possibly fearful of the potential penalties for performing the procedure, waited 20 hours before operating on her, a decision that ultimately proved fatal. Thurman's family only learned that the Georgia committee had ruled her death, quote, preventable, end quote, once ProPublica began their investigation. Thurman's story has taken center stage for the 2024 presidential election. Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris invited Thurman's family to speak at, quote, Unite for America, end quote, hosted by Oprah Winfrey, in order to highlight the consequences of former President Trump's and the Republican Party's abortion policy. Quote, Amber was not a statistic. She was loved by a family, a strong family, and we would have done whatever to get our baby the help that she needed, end quote, Amber's mother, Shanette, said. Harris spoke to the family following their remarks and expressed her sympathy for the loss of their daughter, and sister talked about the broader consequences of Trump's 3 nominees to the Supreme Court. Quote, just a step back in terms of how we got here. The former president chose 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that would overdo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did as he intended, and in state after state, including yours, these abortion bans have been passed that criminalize healthcare providers, in some cases prison for life, end quote, Harris said. Harris also pointed to the, quote, life of the mother, end quote, exception that many of these state laws have, meaning doctors can perform abortions if the life of the mother is at risk. Harris argued that doctors in these cases will often wait until the mother is close to death. Below that, we see an image of women marching in protest. Underneath the image reads the description, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 and ended a national right to abortion, it opened the door for state bans. I continue reading. Quote, here's the problem with that. Is she on death's door before you actually decide to give her help? A doctor or nurse has to say, quote, she might die any minute, so we better give her care, end quote, because otherwise I might go to prison, for life in some cases, end quote. This brings up a really good point. What is the point of acting as if you are pro-life, if you are indeed pro-life for all lives, and then you see women like these women essentially being one step away from being murdered? Because while, yes, Roe v. Wade was passed, that doesn't mean that the states don't get to determine whether or not they get to ban abortion or they get to criminalize the procedure, which means that they also will put these punitive sentences out there for doctors and nurses who they deem are not compliant. And the doctors and nurses are unable to effectively treat people who are needing life-saving treatment. It pains me to see that these doctors and nurses are being threatened with such extreme punitive measures if they do this, even if they are rescuing the life of the mother, because the makers behind the laws and the makers behind these abortion bans don't actually mean what they say when they say the life of the mother. Because if they meant the life of the mother, they would not have worded the law in such a way to allow women like Amber Thurman to die like this. Now, let's head over to the ProPublica story, the original story that kicked this off. The ProPublica title reads, "Abortion bans have delayed emergency medical care. In Georgia, experts say this mother's death was preventable." The subtitle underneath it reads, "At least 2 women in Georgia died after they couldn't access legal abortions and timely medical care in their state, ProPublica has found." This is one of their stories. To the right, we see a gravestone in the shape of a heart that has the name Amber Nicole Thurman. This was written by Kavitha Surana, and it was posted on September 16th at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. We then read, Amber Thurman, a 28-year-old mother, died after she couldn't access legal abortion care in Georgia. The state's maternal mortality review committee found that her death was preventable and said a delay in care had a, quote, large, end quote, impact. I begin reading the article. In her final hours, Amber Nicole Thurman suffered from a grave infection that her suburban Atlanta hospital was well equipped to treat. She'd taken abortion pills and encountered a rare complication. She had not expelled all of the fetal tissue from her body. She showed up at Piedmont Henry Hospital in need of a routine procedure to clear it from her uterus, called a dilation and curettage, or D&C. Side note, this procedure is the same D&C procedure that one of the Duggar sisters received when their baby suffered complications and had to be expelled from the mother's womb. I continue reading. But just that summer, her state had made performing the procedure a felony with few exceptions. Any doctor who violated the new Georgia law could be prosecuted and face up to a decade in prison. Thurman waited in pain in a hospital bed, worried about what would happen to her 6-year-old son, as doctors monitored her infection spreading, her blood pressure sinking, and her organs beginning to fail. It took 20 hours for doctors to finally operate. By then, it was too late. Underneath this, we see a small blurb that says, "Why should I trust your reporting?" I, Kavitha Surana, linked here, am a reporter who has been covering reproductive health care access since Roe v. Wade was overturned. I've spoken with doctors, community workers, and patients across the country about how abortion bans have made pregnancy more dangerous in America, and I've written about the Republican lawmakers who refuse to listen, all of which linked here. If you want to get in touch and learn more about how I work, email me, linked here. I take your privacy very seriously. I continue reading the article. The otherwise healthy 28-year-old medical assistant who had her sights set on nursing school should not have died, an official state committee recently concluded. Tasked with examining pregnancy-related deaths to improve maternal health, the experts, including 10 doctors, deemed hers, quote, preventable, end quote, and said the hospital's delay in performing the critical procedure had a, quote, large, end quote, impact on her fatal outcome. Their reviews of individual patient cases are not made public, but ProPublica obtained reports that confirm that at least 2 women have already died after they couldn't access legal abortions and timely medical care in their state. There are almost certainly others. Committees like the one in Georgia, set up in each state, often operate with a 2-year lag behind the cases they examine, meaning that experts are only now beginning to delve into deaths that took place after the Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion. Thurman's case marks the first time an abortion-related death, officially deemed preventable, the word preventable is in quotes, is coming to public light. ProPublica will share the story of the second in the coming days. We are also exploring other deaths that have not yet been reviewed but appear to be connected to abortion bans. Doctors warned state legislatures women would die if medical procedures sometimes needed to save lives became illegal. Though Republican lawmakers who voted for state bans on abortion say the laws have exceptions to protect the, quote, life of the mother, end quote, medical experts cautioned that the language is not rooted in science and ignore the fast-moving realities of medicine. The most restrictive state laws, experts predicted, would pit doctors' fears of prosecution against their patients' health needs, requiring providers to make sure their patient was inarguably on the brink of death or facing, quote, irreversible, end quote, harm when they intervened with procedures like a D&C. Quote, they would feel the need to wait for a higher blood pressure, wait for a higher fever, really got to justify this one, bleed a little bit more, end quote. Dr. Melissa Kotke, an OBGYN at Emory, warned lawmakers in 2019 during one of the hearings over Georgia's ban. Doctors and a nurse involved in Thurman's care declined to explain their thinking and did not respond to questions from ProPublica. Communications staff from the hospital did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Georgia's Department of Public Health, which oversees the state maternal mortality review committee, said it cannot comment on ProPublica's reporting because the committee's cases are confidential and protected by federal law. The availability of D&Cs for both abortions and routine miscarriage care helped save lives after the 1973 Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade, studies show, reducing the rate of maternal deaths, linked here, for women of color by up to 40% the first year after abortion became legal. But since abortion was banned or restricted in 22 states over the past 2 years, women in serious danger have been turned away from emergency rooms, linked here, and told that they needed to be in more peril before doctors could help. Some have been forced to continue high-risk pregnancies that threatened their lives, linked here. Those whose pregnancies weren't even viable have been told they could return when they were, quote, crashing, end quote, linked here. Such stories have been at the center of the upcoming presidential election, during which the right to abortion is on the ballot in 10 states. But Republican legislatures have rejected small efforts to expand and clarify health exceptions, even in Georgia, which has one of the nation's highest rates of maternal mortality, and where Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women, linked here. When its law went into effect in July 2022, Governor Brian Kemp said he was overjoyed is in quotes, and believed the state had found an approach that would keep women, quote, safe, healthy, and informed, end quote. After advocates tried to block the ban in court, arguing the law put women in danger, attorneys for the state of Georgia accused them of, quote, hyperbolic fear-mongering, end quote. 2 weeks later, Thurman was dead. Below that, we see an image of Thurman posing with her son on the beach. I continue reading. Thurman, who carried the full load of a single parent, loved being a mother. Every chance she got, she took her son to petting zoos, to pop-up museums, and on planned trips, like one to a Florida beach. Quote, the talks I have with my son are everything, end quote, she posted on social media. But when she learned that she was pregnant with twins in the summer of 2022, she quickly decided she needed to preserve her newfound stability. Her best friend, Rakaria Baker, told ProPublica. Thurman and her son had recently moved out of her family's home and into a gated apartment complex with a pool, and she was planning to enroll in nursing school. The timing could not have been worse. On July 20th, the day Georgia's law banning abortion at 6 weeks went into effect, her pregnancy had just passed that mark, according to records her family shared with ProPublica. Thurman wanted a surgical abortion close to home and held out hope as advocates tried to get the ban paused in court, Baker said. But as her pregnancy progressed to its 9th week, she couldn't wait any longer. She scheduled a D&C in North Carolina, where abortion at that stage was still legal, and on August 13th woke up at 4 a.m. to make the journey with her best friend. On their drive, they hit standstill traffic, Baker said. The clinic couldn't hold Thurman's spot longer than 15 minutes. It was inundated with women from other states where bans had taken effect. Instead, a clinic employee offered Thurman a 2-pill abortion regimen approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Mifepristone, mifepristone and misoprostol. Her pregnancy was well within the standard of care for that treatment. Getting to the clinic had required scheduling a day off from work, finding a babysitter, making up an excuse to borrow a relative's car, and walking through a crowd of anti-abortion protesters. Thurman didn't want to reschedule, Baker said. At the clinic, Thurman sat through a counseling session in which she was told how to safely take the pills and instructed to go to the emergency room if complications developed. She signed a release saying she understood. She took the first pill there and insisted on driving home before any symptoms started, Baker said. She took the second pill the next day, as directed. Deaths due to complications from abortion pills are extremely rare. Out of nearly 6 million women who've taken mifepristone in the U.S. since 2000, 32 deaths were reported to the FDA through 2022, linked here, regardless of whether the drug played a role. Of those, 11 patients developed sepsis. Most of the remaining cases involved intentional and accidental drug overdoses, suicide, homicide, and ruptured ectopic pregnancies. Baker and Thurman spoke every day that week. At first, there was only cramping, which Thurman expected. But days after she took the second pill, the pain increased and blood was soaking through more than one pad per hour. If she had lived nearby, the clinic in North Carolina would have performed a DNC for free as soon as she followed up, the executive director told ProPublica. But Thurman was 4 hours away. Here we cut to another image of Amber Thurman. I continue reading. On the evening of August 18th, Thurman vomited blood and passed out at home, according to 911 logs. Her boyfriend called for an ambulance. Thurman arrived at Piedmont Henry Hospital in Stockbridge at 6:51 p.m. ProPublica obtained the summary narrative of Thurman's hospital stay provided to the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, as well as the group's findings. The narrative is based on Thurman's medical records, with identifying information removed. The committee does not interview doctors involved with the case or ask hospitals to respond to its findings. ProPublica also consulted with medical experts, including members of the committee, about the timeline of events. Within Thurman's first hours at the hospital, which says it is staffed at all hours, linked here, with an OB who specializes in hospital care, it should have been clear that she was in danger, medical experts told ProPublica. Her lower abdomen was tender, according to the summary. Her white blood cell count was critically high, and her blood pressure perilously low. At one point, as Thurman got up to go to the bathroom, she fainted again and hit her head. Doctors noted a foul odor during a pelvic exam, and an ultrasound showed possible tissue in her uterus. The standard treatment of sepsis is to start antibiotics and immediately seek and remove the source of the infection. For a septic abortion, that would include removing any remaining tissue from the uterus. One of the hospital network's own practices describes a DNC as a, quote, fairly common minor surgical procedure, end quote, to be used after miscarriage to remove fetal tissue, linked here. After assessing her at 9:38 p.m., doctors started Thurman on antibiotics and an IV drip, the summary said. The OBGYN noted the possibility of doing a DNC the next day. But that didn't happen the following morning, even when an OB diagnosed, quote, acute severe sepsis, end quote. By 5:14 a.m., Thurman was breathing rapidly and at risk of bleeding out, according to her vital signs. Even 5 liters of IV fluid had not moved her blood pressure out of the danger zone. Doctors escalated the antibiotics. Instead of performing the newly criminalized procedure, they continued to gather information and dispense medicine, the summary shows. Doctors had Thurman tested for sexually transmitted diseases and pneumonia. They placed her on Levophed, a powerful blood pressure support that could do nothing to treat the infection and posed a new threat. The medication can constrict blood flow so much that patients could need an amputation once stabilized. At 6:45 a.m., Thurman's blood pressure continued to dip, and she was taken to the intensive care unit. At 7:14 a.m., doctors discussed initiating a DNC, but it still didn't happen. 2 hours later, lab work indicated her organs were failing. according to experts who read her vital signs. At 12:05 p.m., more than 17 hours after Thurman had arrived, a doctor who specializes in intensive care notified the OBGYN that her condition was deteriorating. Thurman was finally taken to an operating room at 2 p.m. By then, the situation was so dire that doctors started with open abdominal surgery. They found that her bowel needed to be removed, but it was too risky to operate because not enough blood was flowing to the area. A possible complication from the blood pressure medication, an expert explained to ProPublica. The OB performed the DNC, but immediately continued with a hysterectomy. During surgery, Thurman's heart stopped. Her mother was praying in the waiting room when one of the doctors approached. Quote, "Come walk with me," end quote, she said. Until she got the call from the hospital, her mother had no idea Thurman had been pregnant. She recalled her daughter's last words before she was wheeled into surgery. They had made no sense coming from a vibrant young woman who seemed to have her whole life ahead of her. Quote, "Promise me you'll take care of my son," end quote. Here we pause and take a brief moment of silence, seeing Amber Thurman's image with her son behind her. I continue reading. There is a, quote, "good chance," unquote, providing a DNC earlier could have prevented Amber Thurman's death, the Maternal Mortality Review Committee concluded. Every state has a committee of experts who meet regularly to examine deaths that occurred during or within a year after pregnancy. Their goal is to collect accurate data and identify the root causes of America's increasing maternal mortality rate. Linked here. Then translate those lessons into policy changes. Their findings and recommendations are sent to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and their states publish an annual report, but the reviews of individual cases are never public. Georgia's committee has 32 regular members from a variety of backgrounds, including OBGYNs, cardiologists, mental health care providers, a medical examiner, health policy experts, community advocates, and others. This summer, the committee reviewed deaths through fall 2022, but most states have not gotten that far. After reviewing Thurman's case, the committee highlighted Piedmont's, quote, "lack of policies/procedures in place to evacuate uterus immediately," end quote, and recommended all hospitals implement policies, quote, "to treat aseptic abortion on an ongoing basis," end quote. It is not clear from the records available why doctors waited to provide a DNC to Thurman, though the summary report shows they discussed the procedure at least twice in the hours before they finally did. Piedmont did not have a policy to guide doctors on how to interpret the state abortion ban when Thurman arrived for care, according to two people with knowledge of internal conversations who were not authorized to speak publicly. In the months after she died, an internal task force of providers there created policies to educate staff on how to navigate the law, though they are not able to give legal advice, the sources said. In interviews with more than 36 OBGYNs in states that outlawed abortion, ProPublica learned how difficult it is to interpret the vague and conflicting language, linked here, in ban's medical exceptions. Especially, the doctors said, when their judgment could be called into question under the threat of prison time. Take the language in Georgia's supposed life-saving exceptions. It prohibits doctors from using any instrument, quote, "with the purpose of terminating a pregnancy," end quote. While removing fetal tissue is not terminating a pregnancy, medically speaking, the law only specifies it's not considered an abortion to remove, quote, "a dead unborn child," end quote, that resulted from a, quote, "spontaneous abortion," end quote, defined as, quote, "naturally occurring," end quote, from a miscarriage or a stillbirth. Thurman had told doctors her miscarriage was not spontaneous. It was the result of taking pills to terminate her pregnancy. There is also an exception, included in most bans, to allow abortions, quote, "necessary in order to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or the substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function," end quote. There is no standard protocol for how providers should interpret such language, doctors said. How can they be sure a jury with no medical experience would agree that intervening was, quote, necessary, unquote? ProPublica asked the governor's office on Friday to respond to cases of denied care, including the 2 abortion-related deaths, and whether its exceptions were adequate. Spokesperson Garrison Douglas said they were clear and gave doctors the power to act in medical emergencies. He returned to the state's previous argument, describing ProPublica's reporting as a, quote, fear-mongering campaign, end quote. Republican officials across the country have largely rejected calls to provide guidance. When legislatures have tried, anti-abortion groups have blocked them. Linked here. In 2023, a group of Tennessee Republicans was unable to push through a small change to the state's abortion ban, intended to give doctors greater leeway when intervening for patients facing health complications. Quote, no one wants to tell their spouse, child, or loved one that their life is not important in a medical emergency as you watch them die when they could have been saved, end quote, said Republican Representative Esther Helton Hayes, a nurse who sponsored the bill. The state's main anti-abortion lobbyist, Will Brewer, vigorously opposed the change, linked here. Some pregnancy complications, quote, work themselves out, end quote, he told a panel of lawmakers. Doctors should be required to, quote, pause and wait this out and see how it goes, end quote. At some hospitals, doctors are doing just that, linked here. Doctors told ProPublica they have seen colleagues disregard the standard of care when their patients are at risk of infection and wait to see if a miscarriage completes naturally before offering a D&C. Linked here. Although no doctor has been prosecuted for violating abortion bans, the possibility looms over every case, they said, particularly outside of well-funded academic institutions that have lawyers promising criminal defense. Doctors in public hospitals and those outside of major metro areas told ProPublica that they are often left scrambling to figure out on a case-by-case basis when they are allowed to provide D&Cs and other abortion procedures. Many fear they are taking on all of the risk alone and would not be backed up by their hospitals if a prosecutor charged them with a crime. At Catholic hospitals, they typically have to transfer patients elsewhere for care. When they do try to provide care, it can be a challenge to find other medical staff to participate. A D&C requires an anesthesiologist, nurses, attending physicians, and others. Doctors said peers have refused to participate because of their personal views or their fear of being exposed to criminal charges. Georgia law allows medical staff to refuse to participate in abortions. Thurman's family members may never learn the exact variables that went into doctors' calculations. The hospital has not fulfilled their request for her full medical record. There was no autopsy. For years, all Thurman's family had was a death certificate that said she died of, quote, septic shock, end quote, and, quote, retained products of conception, end quote, a rare description that had previously only appeared once in Georgia's death records over the last 15 years, ProPublica found. The family learned Thurman's case had been reviewed and deemed preventable from ProPublica's reporting. The sting of Thurman's death remains extremely raw to her loved ones, who feel her absence most deeply as they watch her son grow taller and lose teeth and start school years without her. They focus on surrounding him with love, but know nothing can replace his mother. On Monday, she would have turned 31. Here we end on an image of Amber Thurman in purple against a purple background. Below that we read, how we reported the story. ProPublica reporter Kavitha Sarana reviewed death records and medical examiner and coroner reports to identify cases that may be related to abortion access. She first reached out to Amber Thurman's family and friends a year ago. The family shared her personal documents and signed a release for ProPublica to access her medical information. The Maternal Mortality Review Committee reviewed Thurman's case at the end of July 2024. Do you have any information about how abortions have affected medical care? Reach out to ProPublica reporters covering reproductive health care, including Kavitha Sarana at kavitha.sarana@propublica.org or Cassandra Jaramillo at cassandra.jaramillo@propublica.org. It is sad that Amber Thurman has died. Thankfully, a judge in Georgia went and struck down that abortion ban. Hopefully, that means there won't be any more Amber Thurmans. It is unfortunate that it takes women to die in order for changes to be made into the law like this. If she was a man, perhaps, do you think the law would have acted differently? I won't know, and neither will Amber Thurman. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.
Why is everything so heavy? Holding on to so much more than I can carry. I keep dragging around what's bringing me down. If I just let go, I'd be set free. Holding on.